So welcome everyone. Theo Stiegler here from Nexus for Change. I'm glad to have you for our 30-minute webinar on this Thursday before Thanksgiving Thursday. We will be looking at talking about today making change tangible and using visualization as a tool to get people to wrestle with and grapple with various content in a meaningful way. We had a session last week that talked about design teams. The content for that and the webinar recording is available on our website. The quickest way to get there is to go to our blog, but please feel free to visit nexusforchange.com to check that out. So have you ever been in a situation where you were struggling to share a particular concept or idea, or you had some complex challenges that you were facing and the communication with words seemed to not quite get the point across in the way that you needed to? There's a reason that visualization is a really powerful tool. You've heard probably many, many times the idea that a picture is worth 1,000 words. I was looking for an engaging visual that sort of outlines some of the key elements as to why visuals are so powerful. I found what I thought was a nice depiction here that is obviously aimed at school children. As a full disclaimer or in full disclosure, I am not a visual artist, but I am blessed to get to work with folks that I can describe to some of the ideas like, hey, in a picture, in a visual, shouldn't that look like this or that? And they can oftentimes translate it. There are, however, now in the digital environments, tools that you can utilize to create simple and basic visuals. And so here are some of the elements in a depiction that was created at North Star Paths by @Queen62. Visuals have a different permanence than our spoken words. They allow for language processing, and particularly for the male brain, that can sometimes be really helpful to have that time for language processing. They support transitions. They can make our words more tangible and more clear. They tend to be a lot more inclusive than our language can sometimes be. They are meaningful in supporting independent grappling with content. They often have better transferability rather, than our words do. And they tend to be less prone to things like inflection or tone of voice that could lead to misunderstandings. There's just a few reasons that you want to leverage visuals. We have found that in order for you to figure out how to leverage engaging visuals, it's really honing in on identifying what parts of the message that I'm trying to convey are the ones that I can most effectively visualize. What can I turn into an image so that people can get a different view or a different access point to that content that I'm sharing. And so the suggestion is that you need to hone in on things like process, on structure, on phases or steps that might be part of what it is that you're trying to share. A lot of times there's cyclical processes that are much easier expressed in a visual than in words, because our words tend to be structured in steps in 1, 2, 3, 4 that don't have the same impact in terms of saying, and then the cycle repeats and you go back to the top. Visuals oftentimes for that are much more powerful. So a couple of different ways that you can think about visualization are these three. This is not obviously not a list that is comprehensive necessarily to say that these are the only ways that you can leverage visualization. But the three that I want to kind of think about a little bit this morning are concepting and illustrating, graphic recording, and utilizing video and animation. Concepting and illustrating are ways that you turn an idea or concept or process into an engaging visual. And sometimes in the process of creating that visual, we have found that your stated, written, spoken message can become more clear. What you're looking at here is what we call the 5D process, or 5Ds, that we use quite regularly in conversations with clients and in conversations with students in terms of how to get to a deliverable. And obviously having Ds or words that begin with D is nice. That helps the brain to remember you guys call that a mnemonic device in English. Sorry, my brain left me there for a minute. In German, my native language, it's called a donkey bridge. I have no idea why. One of these days I have to figure out why a mnemonic device is called a donkey bridge. But you can see in the one depiction on the left that simply has the words with an arrow and it connects discovery to delegate or delegating. And so one way that we thought of this process was, well, you want to get from discovering what the issue is to being able to delegate specific pieces of the deliverable. What is the connection to get from one to the other? And so this arrow of designing, developing, and delivering, we put in between there. Then we started talking about, well, is delegate the right piece? Should maybe that 50 be something like deliberate, that speaks to evaluating what you've delivered and then going back? And in that conversation, the second image here on the right came up that, you know, has more of a up and down and supposed to imply that at some point you go back to square and you start over with the discovery of the efforts that you're going through. So again, identifying a set of steps, a specific process or idea, and finding out how can I express that in a visual, what are the connectivity pieces between different steps, for example, can be really meaningful in turning a concept or model into a visual. Another visualization tool that we use a lot in our practice that is absolutely powerful a lot of times in both the real-time effect that it has, as well as after the fact coming back to content of a meeting, of a conversation, of a conference session, is graphic recording. In graphic recording, you can really provide, if you will, a real-time translation of the important conversations that are going on in the room. And we've had a lot of times folks interact with a graphic recording that's going on, let's say, or going up rather, on a whiteboard in the room where a meeting is being held. And they're saying, can we go back to what that image up there that represented the following for me? Let's go back to that for a minute. And the way that our brains are able to remember both the combination of maybe having some written notes after the fact, together with your personal memory of that conversation in a visual depiction, can be incredibly powerful, particularly in sharing maybe that content with somebody that wasn't at that particular meeting or engagement. So if you ever have a situation where you believe that there's going to be some really meaningful content shared in a conference session, for example, in a teaching engagement, we encourage you to explore that idea of having either a graphic recorder present, or sometimes even having some basic graphic recording skills that you can get your hands on yourself if that is something that's in your wheelhouse. Again, it isn't really for me, but I've had great benefit of folks working with us that have been able to provide that, and it's been very powerful in the engagement of that content. Another piece that I think is meaningful, really in sort of the times that we live in, my 9-year-old son can run circles around me on any sort of tablet device or iOS device or Android device. And he seems to know how to sidestep things that I might want to put in place to at least deter him from certain content. And then he'll tell me, hey, Dad, did you want me to see this video? I had to go around this filter or that thing to look at that. It seems that the younger generations are very actively engaging with content in these small video bits in memes. And so sometimes taking what is a static image maybe at the beginning or a model and turning it into an animation or a short video can be highly effective. The image that you're seeing here is from a video that accompanies a pretty, for me, famous speech now by Sir Ken Robinson that talks about the education system in our Western environments. I highly recommend that you check that out. I'll put the YouTube link for it into our chat. In creating videos and animations, though, something that my cousin sort of, she's a visual artist, that she implored me is that really you need to have a solid 2D image that gets your point across before you develop and go into creating an animation. There are examples of really fancy videos that don't make a good point because the core of the image was not strong enough to support being a video or being an animation. So sort of her call to me was make sure that you have a clear 2D image that gets the message across. Then you can start playing with turning it into 3D or into animations and so forth. So those are sort of the three types of visualizations that that we use regularly for our content sharing. What are some of the tools that you can use to create content like that? The Adobe Suite tools, I think, is a go-to for a lot of folks professionally that do this kind of work. There are endless options and opportunities in doing that. On my end, I sort of find myself looking for what are simple starter tools, and Google Drawings that are part of the Google Suite are really a great place to get started and begin that journey if that's something new for you. I encourage you to check that out. A little more involved tool is SketchUp, where you can build small animations in 3D. That tool is though right on the edge of having so many powerful tools that initially can be overwhelming how to get started. Again, this is by no means a comprehensive listing. There are lots and lots and lots and lots of tools out there. If you have experience with any sort of graphics tool, photo editing tool, a lot of times there are siblings to that product that might allow you to benefit from some workflow that you're already familiar with. So I'd encourage you to look at what do I use that has is related in sort of a software suite, for example, and explore those tools as you see fit. So next, I really want to just talk through a couple of examples of how we've done and how we've utilized visualization, and then open it up to you all for some questions. I don't believe that there is sort of a set process, at least that we've been able to identify, that visualization and turning a concept always takes these steps in order to turn it into a visual. A lot of times it's sort of creative conversations and interchange. So the one piece that I do want to encourage you as part of this is that the best visuals, the best images that we've been able to create, that really we had good user engagement, or we had a client say, oh, that's a perfect picture of what we're after here, were always ones that we vetted, if you will, with a larger group. So somebody had an idea, what if we made it look like that, and then shared it with somebody else. That group came back and had some ideas and iterations. So really encourage you to have a conversation as to what's the best picture to get this point across. What you're looking at here is the practice model that basically represents in sort of a very structured view what Nexus for Change is all about. Our foundation is our network, is a community of communities that tries to touch thought leaders and experts in all things collaborative change. And on that foundation, we're looking to work in 3 areas. One is publishing, one is training and development, one is consulting. Those are the 3 pillars on our foundation. And a lot of times when people ask me to speak about Nexus for Change, in my mind, I have this visual to kind of go through as to what describes us best. Another example would be this event evaluation flow. How do you develop an event evaluation for an engagement, for a conference, for a client engagement? And so rather than listing out the steps that we would do, we came up with this circular process that includes engaging our client, providing results, discussing them, having an after action review, and then fine tuning the constructs that we're using in that evaluation process. Another example that maybe shows, I'll speak in a minute to what maybe some of the limitations are of using visuals. We helped our client, E-Extension, it's a national foundation. We helped them develop a competency framework that looks at what does a consulting engagement look like in their particular context, and what are the skill sets, the competencies for somebody who works in that consulting context. And we started with what you're seeing on the left, the competencies that a consultant would have, their approach, and how do you get to the outcomes, innovation, impact, revenue, and joy. We had some good responses to that visual, but when we came up with the one on the right, that basically in the center you have the consultant holding up what they're called credibility competencies. So these are skill sets and levels of expertise that make you want to engage with that individual, because you can see that they know their stuff in a particular area. So that's what they're holding up, but they're standing on a foundation of both personal competencies and professional competencies. And if you want to take a guess which of the 2 visuals resonated better with our client and which one they leveraged to utilize in some of their internal materials, you probably would guess right in that it's the one with the individual standing up rather than the more formal one on the left side that lays out the approach. Another example here is an attempt to visually depict our practice building approach. We had talked with a client about what are sort of the core pieces of what you are going after and engaging your particular clients and your clientele. And we came up with the image on the left that there is a method, branding elements, a networking community, a user interface. And while they sort of fit together, there wasn't a solid consistency in how those things were coexisting. And so our assessment was they were stable, but there were some disconnects. And then we decided, well, how we move forward, what is it that we're after? And the image on the bottom shows you that it's more robust and more connected. There's no blank space of disconnects between these elements in moving forward. I think my couple more, my one other example is here. I spoke to identifying what's the process, what are the steps. Yes, Carol.
Go back to the other one real quick.
Go back to this one?
The one, yeah.
Or this one?
No, next one.
Okay.
Why did the words change? You implied that it was the visual that changed, but in addition, some of the words changed.
Well, I think that they honed in more detail as to what these items were. So you can see that the user interface is still the user interface, but they've identified that the user interface consists of content, training, and services to their clientele. The branding on the right of the image turns into brand, but what does that entail? It's the inbound and outbound marketing services that they are looking to pursue to engage. And the methodology on the left, how do we define it? They utilized a set of design elements to really hone into what their methodology was and how they could express it and write it up and share it, basically. Does that answer the question, Carol?
Yes, and it was done collaboratively. It wasn't done for them. Is that accurate?
Correct. That is correct. Yes.
Thank you.
So here's one example where we started with a table that had rows in it that was trying to identify certain steps, and eventually turned again into a circular image that gives you an impetus to think that once you're at step number 6, you're setting up and getting ready to do the cyclical process over. Last example is one of a graphic recording. Again, I spoke a little bit to the fact that we found it very powerful in engaging people, especially that weren't at the event, having somebody that was present be able to share with a visual and walk somebody through, this is what we experienced, these are some of the key findings, these are some of the key conversations that took place, can be really meaningful and powerful, in fact. One more here is the change formula that some of you might be familiar with. D is the dissatisfaction or desire for change. V is the vision that somebody has for what that change would look like. F are the first steps that need to be engaged in order to enable it. And S are the supports and structures that are put in place for the change or transformation. And when you have those 4 factors come together, they can overcome the resistance to change. You'll notice that if you have even one of these 4 be at 0, then mathematically speaking, you don't overcome R resistance because the whole formula turns into 0. So one way to visualize that was this wheel of change that has internal motion. The question is, are you placing it on the foundation of momentum where it can move forward in one direction, or does it get sucked up against the resistance against change, which turns it into the other direction? I have a little, I have a link to a PDF that I'll put in the chat for you that explores that metaphor for change, if you will, a little bit further. Finally, what is sort of the limitation? Visuals don't work well, we found, when we try to put too much in one visual. I showed you earlier in one example here with the competency framework, the response that we got from people utilizing and engaging with this visual content was that they were overwhelmed by all the stuff that was in that image on the left. they were much more clear as to the image on the right with the gentleman, or I suppose it could be any sex or gender change agent that is holding up their credibility competencies. That was a much more engaging visual, much simpler. So simplicity can be important for visuals. What you see here is one depiction of the virtual bridge, which was one of the connecting phases in a specific method approach. And we tried to cram too much in it. It didn't really get the resonance that we had hoped for. So we had to go back and sort of develop a much simplified version of this image in order for that to be a successful engagement that we could leverage that image for. Those are my examples. And what questions might you have? Feel free to unmute yourself. Any thoughts, contributions that you have are most welcome.
Hi, Theo. I just wanted to comment that I'm not sure if you are familiar with the type of work that Birgit does and Genuine Contact, what it's all about. Do you know anything about it? Yeah. So no. Okay. So
you're talking about Birgit Williams.
Yeah, Birgit.
From Genuine
I
Contact.
To the organization. So I was just thinking that we don't rely that much on technology, you know. We do have lots of online meetings, kind of like this, but we don't rely that much on technology. But when we do have online meetings, I think that this way of collaborating seems quite interesting. I think well, I would have to explore it, of course, to see what the options are and see what it's all about. Yeah, because it seems very interesting. Like we do a lot of, you know, drawings and things, but it's kind of personal. We do it ourselves and it's nothing. But I think always visuals are much more compelling than words.
Yeah, and I think I know that a lot of times in the meetings, in that context, in that approach, you guys use visuals, for example. I think I've seen in the online meetings to as representations for yourselves that go around the circle. And so I think there is built into the Genuine Contact approach certainly an acknowledgement of the value of that visual engagement. Thank you.
So I don't have a question. I have an area that always interests me. When you see it on the screen with your examples, it looks so professional. And many people don't have artistic capabilities and are inhibited by that. So do you get somebody else who does the art, or is it learnable?
I think it's both. A lot of, like, the visual here that I told you was a little bit too dense. The client didn't really like it. The visual here with the gentleman on the right, or the change agent, I shouldn't say gentleman, the lady or gentleman, holding up the credibility competencies. Those images were created by somebody who is a graphic artist, but they started in basically a stick figure drawing that I supplied to that person and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Can you make that look better? A lot of the other images, the one you see here about the practice building, those are created in Google Drawings and, you know, are pretty basic, insert shape. So I would encourage anyone that wants to dabble in that to just go for it and see what they can create. It's, I think, less difficult than we might suspect it could be with some of the tools that are out there these days.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Theo, Sam here.
Yes, Sam.
What are the various latest tools which OD professionals are using for change management, doing live sessions?
For change management, doing live sessions, I think Zoom, the platform that we're on here, has sort of pretty distinctly cornered that market, because they were the first to, and this is not supposed to be like a Zoom advertisement, but in our practice, it's the tool that we found is most intuitive, has sort of the lowest threshold for people to engage. It has breakout rooms that you can leverage as part of engagement. So if we had a group of 60, we could break out in smaller rooms, 3 to 4 to 5 people, and leverage that technology further.
So my question is more towards this visual arts.
Oh, I don't know that there is one specific tool to say that this is what people use in the context of collaborative change. A lot of the authors that were engaging used the Google Suite tools because you can collaboratively work and edit on, you know, word processing documents, on spreadsheets, even on these drawings. So if I use Google Drawing and I share that document with somebody, we can both in real time move shapes around and edit text and context and content in that drawing. There are now sort of similar tools in the Microsoft suite where you can leverage some virtual engagement where people can in real time collaborate on text documents and spreadsheets and so forth. But I think the Google suite of products is one that we certainly use quite regularly and with good success to collaborate in real time. Does that answer your question, Sam? I'm not sure if that's...
Yep.
Okay. Okay, that gets us to our 30 minutes. I thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you spending some time with us this morning. Again, we're supported by the Organization Development and Change Doctorate Program at Bowling Green State University. Go to nexusforchange.com to check out our future sessions. I will share with you some of the content and the links that were in the chat for today in a follow-up email. And appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your time today. And
Thank you.
have a wonderful Thanksgiving week coming up, those of you that are stateside, and enjoy Spain, Elizabeth.